An experienced mason survived the most devastating collapse in local construction history, which killed all his teammates in seconds. What he lived through in the rubble, fighting for life while hearing the last breaths of his friends, changed his perception of everything. This is the real story of how survivor's guilt, deep depression, and trauma almost destroyed him completely, but also how he found strength to rise again and transform his pain into purpose, saving other lives and honoring the memory of those he lost. Leave in the comments, how would you deal with survivor's guilt after being the only one who lived? Chapter 1. Danny Morrison had been laying bricks for 13 years, but the crew he worked with at Riverside Construction had become more than just colleagues. They were his brothers. At 35 years old, Danny was the unofficial leader of an 8-man masonry crew that had worked together for over 5 years, developing the kind of trust and camaraderie that made even the most challenging construction projects feel manageable. The crew was tight-knit in ways that went beyond professional relationships. There was Miguel Santos, 28, who had just gotten engaged and constantly showed everyone pictures of his fiancée. Tommy O'Brien, 32, the jokester who could make the team laugh even during the most stressful workdays. Big Jim Peterson, 41, the gentle giant who never missed his daughter's soccer games. Carlos Martinez, 26, saving money to bring his parents from Mexico. Frank Williams, 38, who had taught Danny some of his best masonry techniques. Kevin Walsh, 24, the youngest, who looked up to Danny like an older brother. And Joe Rodriguez, 39, Danny's best friend since trade school. They worked on the Grandview residential complex, a luxury apartment building that was supposed to house young professionals and growing families. It was honest work that Danny took pride in, creating homes where people would build their lives, raise children, and make memories. Danny lived in a comfortable house with his wife Sarah, whom he had married 8 years ago, and their twin 6-year-old daughters, Emma and Lily. The construction work provided a stable income that allowed Sarah to work part-time as a school teacher while being available for the girls when they came home from school. Recently, Danny had been thinking about expanding his skills beyond traditional masonry work. He had been studying advanced construction and business techniques through various professional development resources, including TED's Woodworking, which offered comprehensive guides for skilled tradespeople looking to develop specialized expertise that could command higher rates and provide more career flexibility. The system fascinated Danny because it showed how skilled craftsmen could build sustainable businesses around their expertise, potentially providing the kind of financial security that would allow him to spend more time with his family while still pursuing the construction work he loved. But Danny was also content with his current situation, leading a crew of men he respected and trusted, working on projects that would shelter families for generations, and coming home each evening to Sarah and the twins. It felt like a complete life. The morning of September 15th started like any other workday. Danny arrived at the Grandview site at 6:30 a.m., reviewed the day's work with his crew, and began the routine of laying the brickwork that would complete the building's exterior walls. They were working on the 7th floor, with Danny and his team positioned near the southeast corner of the building where they had been installing the facade that would give the Grandview complex its distinctive appearance. The work required precision and teamwork. Each man had his role, some mixing mortar, others carrying bricks, Danny and the more experienced masons doing the detailed laying work that required years of skill to master properly. The rhythm they had developed over 5 years together made even complex work seem effortless. At 2:47 p.m., Danny was checking the alignment of a section of brickwork when he heard a sound that he would never forget. A deep, grinding noise that seemed to come from the building's core, like the sound of massive concrete slabs shifting against each other. "Did you guys hear that?" Danny called out to his crew. Before anyone could answer, the sound came again, louder and more ominous. Danny looked up to see dust falling from the ceiling above them, and cracks appearing in the concrete structure that supported the floor they were working on. "Everyone off this floor! Now!" Danny shouted. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was too late. The collapse happened with terrifying speed. The structural failure began in the building's core and cascaded outward, causing floor after floor to pancake downward in a roar of breaking concrete, twisting steel, and falling debris. Danny felt the floor beneath his feet give way, and he was falling through space filled with dust, chunks of concrete, and the screams of his crew. In those few seconds of falling, Danny's mind registered fragments. Miguel calling out for help. Tommy's voice cut off mid-scream, the sight of Big Jim reaching toward him as they both fell through the collapsing structure. Then everything went dark, as Danny was buried under tons of rubble, trapped in a pocket of space that was barely large enough for his body. The silence after the collapse was worse than the noise had been. Danny was conscious, pinned by concrete and steel, unable to move but aware that he was alive when everything around him suggested he should be dead. He could hear water dripping somewhere nearby, and the distant sound of car alarms triggered by the building's collapse. But most haunting were the voices of his crew members, trapped like him in the rubble but injured in ways that Danny couldn't see. Miguel was calling weakly for help, his voice growing fainter with each call. Tommy was making sounds that weren't quite words, as if he was trying to speak through injuries that made communication impossible. Danny tried to respond, to let them know he was alive, and that help would come, but his own voice was barely a whisper in the confined space where he was trapped. For 14 hours, Danny lay pinned in the rubble, listening as the voices of his friends gradually fell silent. Miguel's calls for help stopped after about 4 hours. Tommy's labored breathing continued for what felt like forever, before it too went quiet. One by one, Danny heard his brothers die in the darkness, knowing that he was powerless to help them or even comfort them in their final moments. The rescue teams found Danny 26 hours after the collapse, dehydrated and suffering from multiple injuries but miraculously alive. He was the only survivor from a disaster that had killed 37 people, including all 7 members of his masonry crew. As Danny was pulled from the rubble and rushed to the hospital, he couldn't understand why he had lived when his friends, men with wives and children, men with dreams and plans for the future, had died in the darkness while he survived. The question of why he had lived when others died would haunt Danny for years to come, nearly destroying him before ultimately leading him to discover a purpose he never could have imagined. Chapter 2. Danny's physical recovery from the building collapse took 3 months of surgeries, physical therapy, and medical treatments for the injuries he had sustained during his 26 hours trapped in the rubble. But his psychological recovery would take much longer, and prove far more difficult than healing his broken bones and internal injuries. The survivor's guilt began almost immediately after Danny regained consciousness in the hospital. While doctors and nurses celebrated his miraculous survival, Danny felt overwhelmed by the knowledge that 7 good men had died in the same disaster that he had somehow survived. Sarah stayed by his bedside throughout his hospitalization, trying to help him understand that his survival was not something to feel guilty about, but something to be grateful for. Emma and Lily, too young to fully comprehend what their father had experienced, were simply happy that Daddy was coming home. But Danny couldn't shake the memories of listening to his friends die in the darkness, knowing that chance or luck or divine intervention had placed him in the one spot where survival was possible, while putting his crew members in locations where death was inevitable. The funerals were the worst part. Danny attended all 7 services, sitting in wheelchairs or on crutches, facing the families of men whose deaths he had witnessed but been powerless to prevent. Miguel's fiancée asked Danny to tell her about Miguel's final hours, and Danny couldn't find words to describe how her future husband had called her name as he died in the rubble. Tommy's parents wanted to know if their son had suffered, and Danny had to lie, telling them that Tommy had lost consciousness quickly when Danny knew that wasn't true. Big Jim's daughter asked Danny why her daddy had died when Danny got to live, and Danny had no answer that made sense to a 12-year-old girl who would never see her father again. The investigation into the Grandview collapse revealed that the disaster had been caused by structural failures that resulted from cost-cutting measures and construction shortcuts that had compromised the building's integrity. The tragedy could have been prevented if the construction company had followed proper engineering specifications instead of using substandard materials to increase their profit margins. Danny's testimony was crucial to the investigation, but providing it required him to relive the disaster repeatedly, describing in detail how he had watched his friends die while being unable to help them. Each retelling of the story deepened his conviction that he should have died with them, that his survival was somehow unfair to their memory, The legal settlements from the construction company provided Danny and Sarah with financial compensation for his injuries and suffering, but no amount of money could address the psychological trauma that was destroying Danny's ability to function in normal life. Danny began drinking heavily to numb the pain and guilt that consumed his thoughts every day. He couldn't sleep without nightmares that brought him back to the rubble, hearing Miguel's voice calling for help that never came. He couldn't work construction because every construction site reminded him of the disaster and the friends he had lost. Most devastating was Danny's inability to connect with his own family. Sarah and the twins represented life and hope and normal happiness, while Danny felt like he belonged with the dead, like his survival was a mistake that needed to be corrected. The drinking escalated into a pattern of self-destruction that pushed Sarah to her breaking point. Danny would disappear for days, spending time in bars where nobody knew his story, trying to drink away the memories of his friends' voices in the darkness. "Danny, you're destroying yourself and you're destroying our family," Sarah said during one of their final conversations before she made the decision that would change everything. "The girls are asking why Daddy is always sad, why Daddy doesn't want to play with them anymore. I can't watch you kill yourself, and I can't let the girls watch it either." Sarah took Emma and Lily to stay with her parents, leaving Danny alone in the house with his guilt, his bottles, and his conviction that the wrong person had survived the Grandview collapse. Within 6 months of the disaster, Danny had lost not just his 7 crew members but his wife, his children, his home, and his sense of purpose. He was living in a 1-bedroom apartment, drinking away the settlement money, and seriously considering suicide as the only way to join his friends and end the pain that consumed every moment of his existence. The lowest point came on a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 1 year after the collapse. Danny sat in his apartment with a gun he had purchased, composing letters to the families of his dead crew members, apologizing for surviving when their loved ones had died. But as Danny held the gun and thought about ending his life, he heard something that stopped him. The sound of Miguel's voice, not from his nightmares but from his memory. Miguel had talked constantly about his fiancée, about the life he was planning to build with her, about the children they wanted to have together. Danny realized that killing himself wouldn't honor Miguel's memory or the memories of the other 6 men who had died. If anything, throwing away the life they had been denied would be an insult to their memory and their dreams. Instead of ending his life that night, Danny made a decision that would begin his long journey back from the darkness. He would find a way to live that honored the memory of his friends and gave meaning to his survival. The next morning, Danny called a suicide prevention hotline and asked for help. For the first time since the collapse, he admitted that he wanted to live, but didn't know how to live with the guilt and trauma that had consumed his existence. The counselor who took his call helped Danny understand that survivor's guilt was a normal response to trauma, but also that it could be overcome through professional help and the gradual development of purpose that gave meaning to survival. Danny's journey back to life would be long and difficult, requiring him to confront not just his own pain, but his responsibility to use his survival to help others and to honor the memory of 7 good men who had died in a preventable tragedy. What do you think about Danny's struggle with survivor's guilt? Have you ever experienced trauma that made you question why certain things happen to some people and not others? Leave your thoughts in the comments about how you would cope with losing everyone close to you in such a tragic way. Chapter 3. Danny's path to recovery began at Riverside Recovery Center, a facility that specialized in helping people overcome trauma, addiction, and the kind of deep depression that had nearly cost him his life. Checking himself into treatment was the hardest and most important decision Danny had made since the night he chose to live, instead of joining his friends in death. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the psychologist who worked with Danny throughout his recovery, helped him understand that survivor's guilt was not just about feeling bad about living when others died, but about learning to find purpose in survival that honored rather than dishonored the memory of those who were lost. "Danny, your friends died because of a preventable tragedy caused by corporate negligence," Dr. Carter explained during one of their early sessions. "Your survival gives you the opportunity to ensure that other workers don't die in similar preventable tragedies. That's not guilt. That's responsibility." The concept took months for Danny to accept. The group therapy sessions at Riverside were particularly difficult because they required Danny to share his story with other trauma survivors. many of whom had experienced losses that made them question the meaning and value of their own survival. But gradually, Danny began to understand that his survival was not a mistake or an injustice, but an opportunity to use his experience to protect other construction workers from the kind of corporate negligence that had killed his crew. The breakthrough came during his 4th month at Riverside, when Danny met Robert Chen, a former firefighter who had survived a warehouse fire that killed 6 of his fellow firefighters. Robert had overcome his own survivor's guilt by becoming a fire safety consultant who had prevented dozens of similar tragedies through his work with building owners and fire departments. "Danny, the question isn't why you survived when they died," Robert said during one of their conversations. "The question is what you're going to do with the life you've been given. Your friends can't speak for themselves anymore, but you can speak for them." Robert's words helped Danny begin to see his survival not as an accident, but as an opportunity to become an advocate for construction safety and workers' rights. The men who had died in the Grandview collapse couldn't fight for better construction standards, but Danny could use his voice and his experience to prevent other crews from facing the same preventable tragedy. Danny's recovery accelerated once he found this sense of purpose. He began studying construction safety regulations, learning about the legal requirements and industry standards that had been violated in the Grandview project. The knowledge was difficult to acquire because it forced him to relive the technical details of how his friends had died, but it also gave him the tools to prevent similar deaths. During his time at Riverside, Danny also began exploring ways to rebuild his relationship with Sarah and the twins. The separation had been necessary for everyone's safety and well-being, but Danny hoped that recovery might create the possibility of rebuilding the family that his trauma had destroyed. Sarah visited Danny regularly during his treatment, but she was cautious about the possibility of reconciliation. "Danny, I can see that you're getting better and I'm proud of the work you're doing to heal," she said during one of their conversations. "But Emma and Lily need to know that if you come home, you're really home to stay, not just visiting between relapses." Danny understood Sarah's concerns. His drinking and depression had hurt not just him, but 2 little girls who needed a father they could count on. Rebuilding their trust would require more than just getting sober. It would require proving that he had found a way to live with his trauma without being consumed by it. The work Danny was doing to understand construction safety gave him a sense of purpose that went beyond just personal healing. He began to envision a future where his survival could be used to save other lives, where the deaths of his crew members could lead to changes that protected future construction workers. But Danny also understood that rebuilding his life would require more than just psychological healing and newfound purpose. He needed to develop practical skills and economic opportunities that would allow him to support his family while pursuing his mission to improve construction safety. During his final months at Riverside, Danny began exploring advanced training opportunities that could help him transition from traditional construction work to specialized consulting that focused on safety and accident prevention. The professional development materials he had been studying before the collapse, including resources like Ted's Woodworking, offered comprehensive guides for skilled tradespeople looking to develop expertise that could command higher rates while serving important social purposes. The combination of his practical construction experience, his intimate knowledge of how safety failures could cause catastrophic accidents, and the business development skills he was learning suggested that Danny could build a career around preventing the kind of tragedy that had killed his friends. After 18 months at Riverside Recovery Center, Danny was ready to return to the world, but not to the same life he had lived before the collapse. He was ready to build something new, a life that honored the memory of 7 good men while serving the safety and well-being of construction workers who faced similar risks every day. Dr. Carter's final assessment noted that Danny had not just recovered from his trauma, but had transformed it into a mission that gave profound meaning to his survival. "Danny has learned to carry his grief without being crushed by it," she wrote. "He has found a way to honor his friend's memory by dedicating his life to protecting other workers from similar preventable tragedies." Danny's graduation from the recovery program was attended by Sarah and the twins, who were cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding their family around Danny's newfound sense of purpose and stability. But the real test of Danny's recovery would come when he returned to construction sites and faced the fears and memories that had nearly destroyed him after the collapse. "Thank you so much for staying with us this far. in this incredible story of recovery and transformation. We truly appreciate your dedication as a viewer, and believe me, the best is yet to come. What follows will show us how Danny's journey from the depths of despair became a beacon of hope for countless other workers facing their own struggles and tragedies. Chapter 4. Danny's return to construction work after nearly 3 years away was one of the most difficult challenges of his recovery process. His first day back on a job site required him to confront not just his own fears and traumatic memories, but also the reactions of other workers who knew his story and weren't sure how to interact with someone who had survived such a devastating tragedy. The job was a small residential project, a house renovation that was far removed from the high-rise construction that had claimed his crew. Danny had deliberately chosen a small, safe project for his return to work. But even the sound of hammering and power tools was enough to trigger memories of the Grandview collapse. But Danny had also prepared for this challenge through months of therapy and practical training. He had developed coping techniques for managing panic attacks and flashbacks, and he had a support system that included Dr. Carter, his recovery group, and Sarah, who was cautiously optimistic about their reconciliation. Most importantly, Danny had found a purpose that went beyond just earning money. He was returning to construction work, not just to support his family, but to gather the practical experience and credibility that would allow him to become an effective advocate for construction safety. During his first months back at work, Danny began incorporating safety advocacy into his daily construction activities. He would arrive at job sites early to assess safety conditions, document potential hazards, and talk with other workers about the importance of proper safety procedures. Danny's reputation as a survivor gave weight to his safety advocacy in ways that regular safety inspectors couldn't match. When Danny talked about the importance of proper fall protection or structural inspections, other workers listened because they knew he had personally experienced the consequences of safety failures. But Danny's advocacy work also made some contractors and site supervisors uncomfortable. His presence reminded everyone that construction work could be deadly, and his insistence on proper safety procedures sometimes slowed down work in ways that affected profits and schedules. The resistance Danny encountered reminded him of the corporate negligence that had killed his crew, and it reinforced his determination to develop the independence and expertise that would allow him to be more effective in his safety advocacy work. During this period of rebuilding his career and family life, Danny returned to studying the advanced business and professional development materials he had been exploring before the collapse. The Ted's Wood Working Resources provided comprehensive guidance for skilled tradespeople looking to develop consulting businesses that could serve important social purposes while providing financial independence. Call to action. The system offered exactly what Danny needed: a framework for combining his construction expertise with his safety advocacy to build a sustainable business that could support his family while serving the mission that had given meaning to his survival. If you're a skilled worker who wants to transform your expertise into a meaningful business that serves others while honoring important values, discover how Ted's Woodworking can help you build a thriving consulting practice that combines financial success with genuine social impact. Click here to learn how thousands of professionals have created businesses that reflect their deepest purposes and commitments. Danny's consulting business began informally, with contractors and safety organizations asking him to review construction sites and provide recommendations for improving safety procedures. His unique perspective as someone who had survived a catastrophic safety failure made his assessments particularly valuable to clients who wanted to prevent similar tragedies. The business grew organically as word spread about Danny's expertise and his commitment to preventing construction accidents. Within 18 months of returning to work, Danny had enough consulting contracts to support his family while dedicating significant time to safety advocacy and accident prevention. But perhaps more importantly, Danny's work was having a measurable impact on construction safety. Several contractors had implemented new safety procedures based on his recommendations, and at least 3 potential accidents had been prevented through safety improvements that Danny had suggested. The work was emotionally challenging because it required Danny to constantly think about construction accidents and safety failures, but it was also deeply satisfying because it gave concrete meaning to his survival and the deaths of his friends. Danny's family life was also slowly healing. Sarah had agreed to try living together again. and Emma and Lily were gradually rebuilding their relationship with a father who was present and engaged in ways he hadn't been during his years of depression and alcoholism. The twins, now 9 years old, were old enough to understand that their father had experienced something terrible, but had found a way to help other people because of what he had learned from that experience. "Daddy, why did your friends die but you didn't?" Emma asked during one of their bedtime conversations. Danny had learned to answer this question honestly, but in ways that a 9-year-old could understand. "I don't know why I lived when they died, sweetheart. But I think maybe I'm supposed to use my life to help keep other daddies safe so they can come home to their little girls." Danny's transformation from trauma survivor to safety advocate was also having broader impacts beyond his immediate family and consulting work. He had begun speaking at construction safety conferences and training programs, sharing his story in ways that helped other workers understand the real human costs of safety violations and corporate negligence. The speaking engagements were difficult because they required Danny to relive the collapse and his friends' deaths repeatedly. But they were also powerful because audiences could see the genuine emotion and commitment behind Danny's advocacy for better safety standards. "I'm not here to scare you," Danny would tell his audiences. "I'm here to remind you that the safety procedures we sometimes think are annoying or time-consuming exist to protect real people with families who love them. Miguel, Tommy, Big Jim, Carlos, Frank, Kevin, and Joe died because those procedures weren't followed. I lived so I could make sure their deaths weren't meaningless." Danny's story had become a powerful tool for changing attitudes about construction safety, helping workers and contractors understand that safety regulations weren't bureaucratic obstacles, but life-saving protections for people who deserve to go home safely to their families every day. Chapter 5. 5 years after the Grandview collapse, Danny had built a life that honored the memory of his fallen crew members while creating meaningful safety improvements for construction workers throughout the region. His consulting firm, Morrison Construction Safety, had grown to employ 6 specialists who conducted safety assessments, accident investigations, and training programs for contractors and safety organizations. The business success had exceeded anything Danny had achieved during his years as a traditional construction worker, but more importantly, it had given him a platform for the safety advocacy work that had become his life's mission. The advanced business development principles he had mastered through his professional studies had been crucial to building a sustainable enterprise that combined technical expertise with genuine social impact. Danny's reputation as both a survivor and a safety expert had made him one of the most sought-after consultants for construction projects where safety was a priority. His assessments had identified potential hazards that had led to safety improvements on hundreds of construction sites, and his training programs had educated thousands of workers about the importance of following safety procedures. But perhaps most meaningful to Danny were the letters he received from construction workers and their families, thanking him for safety improvements that had prevented accidents and saved lives. These letters served as daily reminders that his survival had indeed served a purpose, and that the deaths of his crew members had led to changes that protected other families from experiencing similar losses. One letter, from the wife of a construction worker whose life had been saved by safety procedures that Danny had recommended, particularly moved him. "Mr. Morrison, my husband came home safely last month because of the safety training your company provided to his crew. When their scaffold started to fail, they knew how to secure themselves because of what they learned from your program. I want you to know that somewhere in heaven, your friends are proud of what you've accomplished in their memory." Danny's family life had also been restored in ways that seemed impossible during his darkest days after the collapse. Sarah had not only agreed to rebuild their marriage but had become a partner in his safety advocacy work, managing the business aspects of Morrison Construction Safety, while Danny focused on the technical and training components. Emma and Lily, now 14 years old, often spoke proudly of their father's work and his role in preventing construction accidents. They had grown up understanding that their father had experienced something terrible, but had transformed that experience into something that helped protect other families. "My dad survived something that killed his best friends," Lily wrote in a school essay about heroes. "He could have been angry or sad forever, but instead he decided to use what happened to him to save other people's lives. I think that's what real heroes do. They turn their worst experiences into ways to help others." The memorial that Danny had established for his 7 crew members had become a place where construction workers and their families came to honor the memory of people who had died in workplace accidents. The memorial included not just the names of Danny's crew, but dozens of other construction workers who had died in preventable accidents throughout the region. Each year on the anniversary of the Grandview collapse, Danny organized a safety conference that brought together construction workers, contractors, safety officials, and family members to discuss accident prevention and remember those who had been lost to workplace tragedies. The annual conference had become one of the most important construction safety events in the region, attracting hundreds of participants who came to learn about accident prevention while honoring the memory of workers who had died on the job. Danny's keynote address at each conference always focused on the same central message, that every construction worker deserved to go home safely to their family every day, and that achieving this goal required constant vigilance, proper procedures, and the courage to speak up when safety was being compromised. Miguel, Tommy, Big Jim, Carlos, Frank, Kevin, and Joe died because people in authority positions valued profits more than lives, Danny would tell his audiences. They can't speak for themselves anymore, but their memory speaks through every safety procedure we follow and every hazard we prevent. The transformation that Danny had achieved, from trauma survivor consumed by guilt to safety advocate dedicated to preventing similar tragedies, had also made him a sought-after speaker for organizations dealing with trauma, recovery, and finding purpose after devastating losses. Danny's message resonated with audiences far beyond the construction industry because it demonstrated how even the most devastating experiences could be transformed into sources of meaning and service to others. I learned that survivor's guilt isn't really about feeling bad for surviving, Danny would explain to these audiences. It's about learning to use your survival to serve purposes that honor the people you lost. You can't change what happened, but you can ensure that what happened leads to something good. The Ted's woodworking principles that had helped Danny build his consulting business had also provided him with a framework for understanding how skilled professionals could create careers that reflected their deepest values and commitments. The success of Morrison Construction Safety had demonstrated that businesses built on integrity and social purpose could be both financially successful and personally meaningful. Danny's consulting firm had become a model for how skilled tradespeople could transform their expertise into businesses that served important social purposes while providing financial independence and professional satisfaction. The recognition that Danny had received for his safety advocacy work included awards from construction industry organizations, safety agencies, and trauma recovery groups. But the recognition that meant the most to him came from the families of construction workers whose lives had been saved through safety improvements that his work had inspired. Standing in his office each evening, surrounded by photographs of the crew members he had lost and letters from families whose loved ones had been protected by the safety measures he had advocated, Danny often reflected on the journey that had taken him from the depths of survivor's guilt to a life of purpose and meaning. The 7 men who had died in the Grandview collapse could never be brought back, but their memory lived on through every safety procedure that Danny had helped implement and every construction worker whose life had been protected by the advocacy work that had grown from their deaths. Danny had learned that healing from trauma didn't mean forgetting or moving on, but rather finding ways to carry grief that transformed it into service to others. His survival had indeed served a purpose, and that purpose had grown into a life that honored both the dead and the living, while creating lasting changes that would protect construction workers for generations to come. The surviving mason who had nearly been destroyed by guilt had become the safety advocate who proved that even the most devastating losses could be transformed into sources of hope, protection, and meaningful service to others who faced similar risks and challenges. This story shows us that even the most devastating tragedies can be transformed into purpose when we find the courage to continue living. Danny proved that survivor's guilt can be transformed into a life mission, and that honoring the dead means dedicating our lives to protecting the living. Sometimes our greatest pain becomes our greatest strength. How would you transform a tragedy into purpose? Tell us in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell for more stories of overcoming. And don't miss the next video with another story that will inspire you deeply.